Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelli Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders and give you insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations.
Today's guest on Innovation and the Digital Enterprise is Jay Topper, a distinguished veteran of the U.S. Army and Coast Guard. With over 25 years of experience in the retail and software as a service sectors, Jay has been at the forefront of driving digital transformation across a variety of industries. His career spans leadership roles in e-commerce, technology, supply chain, and customer service for renowned brands. Currently serving as Chief Customer Officer at Fabric, Jay is focused on fostering growth through customer and partner success, championing an outcome-driven approach to technology and commerce. His prior roles include Chief Digital Officer at Chico's FAS Incorporated, where he led digital strategy, data analytics, and global supply chain initiatives, and CTO at FTD, where he navigated a successful turnaround and led the digital transformation of multiple iconic brands. Jay has also had an impressive tenure at Vitacost.com, Rosetta Stone, and other major companies where he played a key role in e-commerce platform management, customer experience optimization, and global operations. With a proven track record of overseeing complex M&A activities, platform implementations, and driving operational excellence, Jay brings a wealth of knowledge on scaling businesses, enhancing customer experiences, and leveraging technology to achieve growth. We're excited to dive into his insights today on how to align digital strategy with customer-centric innovation, as well as his perspective on leading in both high growth and turnaround scenarios. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm humbled and flattered. Thanks.
Yeah, Jay, I really, getting to know you, I didn't think you'd let us get away with that much complimentary praise. And I appreciate your patience and your willingness to allow us to, tell the truth. So to kick off this conversation, I'd love if you could share a little bit more with the listeners, a little bit more about your role at Fabric and, maybe some of your perspectives on what you see happening in the next couple of, this year. I know we're just at the beginning of 2025. I don't know. It seems like it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, Fabric is a platform that serves the commerce industry. And our platform is called AI Order Cloud. OMS is at the center of it. And we have other components like product catalog and price and promotions and a few other, commerce capabilities. As a chief customer officer, I really have three roles. Role number one is once a sale is made, then I manage the customer. I manage the delivery, the implementation, the customer service, and the follow-on with what customer success is and has been is making sure that the outcomes that the customer expected are realized or exceeded, after the implementation is complete. Then I also have a heavy hand in the partnership ecosystem, especially because they're so intertwined with what I do day to day. And then lastly, I'm actually a content generator for the first time in my career. I do a podcast, I do a regular blog. And because I have so much retail industry, and this is my first time on the sell side, I provide some thought leadership to the LinkedIn community and whoever happens to pay attention. As you probably know, whether that's one person or 100 people, it's always somebody that seems to be interested, in a tip or trick along the way. As far as 2025 goes, there's a little bit of hope in retail, but I also think part of that hope is just being a little bit tired of not having enough hope. And 2024 was a grind for retailers, and it was kind of an unknown entity going in. And I know Q4 did pretty decently, especially the really big players. Some of the small players, maybe not quite as well. I think 2025 is going to be more of the same. And I don't think there's going to be a magical bullet. To me in retail, you need to see upper single digit growth for really all the boats to rise on a high tide, and 2% and 3% and 4% doesn't do it. But I do think there was so much spend in COVID on the digital and the technology stuff, and then there was a snapback the other way. After COVID, I do think there's going to be a little bit more attention paid to modernization, which is where we play. And that's one of the reasons I came to Fabric, because you can't sit on legacy old stuff where you can't get things done fast enough for very long. That was a long answer, but that's an answer.
No, it's tremendous, and I'm super curious. The whole consumption, part of our economy, right, historically has helped buoy through some of those grind years, right, post 9/11, and then looking at some of the forecasts from like a economic perspective for this year, it does seem like the consumers are confident, right? And I do like your idea of like I think they're tired of being tired. Right?
Yeah,
Everybody's kind of
they
waiting
are.
for this. It's like when's the bad news? I think maybe that overreaction to the announcement of DeepSeek was part of that, of like a little bit of like, well, we're looking for bad news, right? And it's like, oh well, was it really bad news? It was ish bad news,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It was scary, but nobody really knew what to be scared of. Uh, so you're thinking this year it's going to be a little bit more of the same from your perspective, single digit growth. And so what do you think your clients need to do to really put themselves in a better position to thrive through 20, more than survive, potentially more than survive, maybe even grow, thrive?
I just turned 64 a few days ago, and I have three of my own tips and tricks that I'm going to focus on in 2024. And the first one, it's really guidance for others that may be looking for their own, North Star for the year. But one is, I think that retailers need to ever remain curious. You can't find when you have all retailers, all companies have problems, all of them. They all have a vision and something they're trying to achieve. And there's blockers along the way. It's not automatic. Otherwise, companies wouldn't need people, to come in and drive change. And at the end of the day, even if you're, a little bit worried about budgets, or you're a little worried about, change management or adoption inside your company, the more you can explore and open your mind to possibilities, the art of the possible, the higher probability there's going to be this connection between problem and solution that not only you believe in, but the entity, the enterprise can believe in. So I think even if people are a little bit down, or people are a little bit skeptical, even if they're feeling optimistic but guarded, I think that's not a time to retreat. It's a time to push ahead. And it doesn't mean spend tens of millions of dollars, but there's a lot going on in retail right now, and a lot of it's noise and a lot of it's fake, but a lot of it's real. And being able to sort through that when the right time comes for your company is super important. And I know that in our company, and I'm not doing an infomercial for my company, but I would drop into a retailer tomorrow for 3 days or 4 days and just help them architect whatever they have going on, whether it has to do with our company or not. My company enables me to really float around the industry and just help. And if it happens to be something that we can play in, great. But if it doesn't, I'm not held accountable to any results from that. And I think seeking out guidance from your network and from partners and vendors and people you trust and people you don't know, so you can get more people that you trust, I think that's really critical, because eventually you have to start fitting these puzzle pieces together. Because in technology, especially, the longer you stay stagnant, the more technical debt you rack up and the harder it is to get things done.
I ironically just had a meeting with a client yesterday, and they're like, things we built in 2013 and haven't taken care of are falling into that trap you just mentioned of like, hey, we have not kept current. And the term legacy usually got attached to something like 20 years old, but we're kind of coming up on like, there was a lot of investment in, the post 2008, right? A lot of growth, a lot of investment, and some of it, if it wasn't reinvested, it's kind of hitting that wall. So you mentioned that there's some real things and some like boogeyman kind of like fake things out there. Can you give us an insight into like what you're seeing?
Well, I think a little bit it's always been the case. I mean, I've always, as a CDO, CIO, CTO, COO, a pretty hands-on guy. I mean, I get it even with the fancy titles that I've had throughout my career, is that I always go into technology and solutions with a little bit of skepticism, because every company's, trying to, every software company, every SI, every integrator, every consultant, they're all trying to serve the needs of their enterprise. And no matter how much you try to be customer focused, the vast majority of companies, the first is their own business. So even going back to things like personalization and big data and the cloud and microservices, these they're not fads. Some of them are very real. But as soon as they become super popular, people start touting them. I just got back from NRF, and I'm not kidding you. There is not a single booth or conversation I had where people weren't talking about AI and what AI, does for you, or hey, I need to understand what AI can do for me. And I've been around this block a lot of times, and there's just a lot more show than go right now in AI. It's easy to slap the name AI in your website. It's easy to do a webinar and talk about it. It's easy to make really good UX so you can show somebody something that looks really badass cool. But you have to really dig into the reality of what's going on behind the curtains, because a lot of that stuff just falls short, just like technology forever. It just falls short of what the expectations were going in.
What would be your guidance to somebody when it comes to, I mean, obviously everybody's got people they report to, and there's always that pressure of like, so what's the guidance you give people around that? Obviously, AI has been around in e-commerce. I mean, Amazon with the whole idea of like, I already picked your product. Here it is, right? Like, I worry sometimes, side note, I worry about these kids who don't have to make decisions. Everything's recommended to them.
Yeah.
Right. Like we used to have to like hunt for things and do comparisons. And now the kids are like, no, the Amazon picked it for me. It's like, no, I'd spend like 4 days trying to figure out which one's the best one. But side issue, I guess like AI is not new to e-commerce in any way, shape, or form. Is that so? Like, so what is the guidance you would give a retailer on like crawl, walk, run kind of approach?
Yeah, real quick on Amazon, then I'll give kind of 2 points that I regularly speak to with retailers. One is I'm amazed that Amazon, with all I purchase from Amazon and my family has purchased, if they looked at my, the ship to address, I'm surprised they can't recommend me what kind of car I want to drive, when I want to buy a new car, the doctors I want to see. Like they should be able to personal profile me like just like crazy. I'm always amazed at how little the personalization is on that site. And I know they do put things that are interesting. Facebook does a better job because I filter out things, and I'm a boomer, so I'm in Facebook, and they show me ads that are amazing. I think there's two North Stars on this. And again, AI, it fits AI, but it could fit anything. Is number one is the things you should be looking for are the things that are going to solve the problems or the hurdles or the obstacles that your company is trying to get through at the enterprise level. And then you need to understand merchandising and marketing and supply chain and the things that are stopping these key functions inside of companies to reach some sort of goal. If you start chasing outside of that box, and not only do people in IT do that, but there's shadow IT in companies where they go find something really cool and go, hey, this will reinvent us. It really comes down to focus and narrowing in on what's important. So that's number one. And that, I'll tell you right now, that takes half your problems away. And then number two is whether you have the staff to do it or you have some kind of ecosystem, you have to get into the technology. And look, I've never coded. I've been a CIO or managed that function since 1997. I've never coded anything. I've never built a server. I've never, built a wide area network on my own or anything. But I know enough to get really smart people around me, whether those are people that I'm paying outside the company or people that work for me, more often the latter, that can really get into the technology. And their job in that one narrow lane is to, is that technology real? Was it built really well? Is it technology we'd be proud to own if we had coded it? And how much versus how much of it is smoke and mirrors. And if you stay true to those two things, and then include a whole bunch of people when you're making a selection to make sure the business side problems are being solved, I think it's just a good North Star to have. And I think that regardless if it's AI or anything else, frankly.
So Jay, I'm going to switch topics a little bit. During our previous call, you mentioned the human aspect and how that's an area of focus for you, and also that you like to move really, really fast. So just curious if you could touch on those topics for our listeners.
Yeah, the human aspect, there's so much to unpack there. I'll throw a couple things out there. You could almost do a whole podcast on that aspect. I think, I talked about curiosity up front. Uh, there's also, I'm a big practitioner and sometimes failing practitioner of self-awareness, knowing yourself, knowing what your drivers are. That whole old thing is, you can't control everyone around you, but you can control yourself. And the better you can master self, the better you can influence the outcomes of others in a positive way. But at the end of the day, the putting together the people side of a department, the mix of people, the people that you're managing, the matrix of people that you're involved with, the consultants or the platforms you're bringing in, making that ecosystem very functionally sound, and with a real hero culture built into it is key, because for a lot of reasons. Number one is it keeps people much more happier and engaged. Number two, it keeps them focused. And number three, it gets things done quickly. As far as speed goes, I've always been a speed freak. And what I mean by speed is that once you go through these things we just talked about, hey, we have problems, hey, we found a solution. I'm an executor at heart, and the faster you can get that done correctly, the better it is for the business. It costs less, and you start realizing the value. And if for some reason you screwed up, you can fail fast. So I'm a big believer in, I can't tell you how many times in my career that I've set, you set a timeline 6 months in advance and everyone buys in. And then a month in, people say, hey, it's going to take 2 more months. And it's like, no, it's not. Let's figure out why you say that. And let's break that down. In fact, let's pull it in a month. And I say that to people and they go, pull it in a month. We all came to you telling you it's going to be a month late, and you're telling us to pull it in a month. I go, let's break it down. Let's get into the detail. What's stopping us? And my experience is, if you have that right people construct and you have people that are looking inside first instead of pointing fingers, that you can break down the components that are stopping you from executing faster. And I mean, when I say fast, I don't mean reckless. I mean the same thing that takes you 6 months, do it in 2. I just think that brings a lot of value to the business and a lot of self, worth, that you're doing, that you're the guardian of that the company that you work for and their shareholders. And I'm old school on that. I believe in that. And so going slow and being a black box and going over budget, like, those are not okay. And so I tend to focus a lot on not being angry at being late, but focusing on what it takes not to be late and to go really quickly and to make really well-informed decisions as fast as humanly possible, with a lot of people involved. So it's hard because you're not making them in a silo.
So I got a ton of questions. One, you're a likable person. How do you do that and retain likability? Because I seem to fail at that, of that idea of let's go fast, let's push. And I know others who are very similar in their approach of no, it's not going to take that long, right? We're being too safe. We're being too worried. Violence of action. It's time to go crack some rocks. We don't need to come up with a plan to how to go buy the axe, right? We're just going to start hitting things and then we'll figure it out on the way. But I got to imagine that you've had some challenges where that rubs people the wrong way. In the recent book about Elon Musk, he has a very similar approach as you to, no, we're going to pull it in, right? We're going to make it. And his head architect is we generally don't hit his date, but we do come in earlier than we would have on our own, right? So it's not that it's perfection. And I think, so, you've got different personality types, right? You're a fast mover, you're aggressive, but we all have a lot of different people on our team. How do you work with some of the folks that maybe, if we look at a disc profile, they're a little bit more on the C, right? And they want to make sure that they're not putting themselves in too stressful a position. And again, all accelerator without brake is not good either. But you're saying more accelerator, less brake. Let's get to second gear a little bit sooner, right? We don't have to wait 100 yards to get to second gear. So what are some of the things that you do to keep the team together?
Yeah, I mean, The first thing I put an incredible amount of trust in the direct report ecosystem that I build around me, and they're involved in each other as well. And I always have people that are far smarter at their discipline than I am, and what they seek, and whether that's someone that I inherit or someone that I bring in, is, they want a couple things, and these are the people that fit a profile of going fast. One is they want to be enabled, and they want to be able to take risks, and they want to not be yelled at when they make a mistake, and they don't like the word blame. I'm a big believer in the hero culture, that if you call out a problem that you created, way to go, and everyone claps, take a moment, stop the train, and applaud. And because then people are not afraid, instead of it going on the defense. I also think you have to involve a lot of stakeholders, and you have to put a lot of energy there into the people that are around you. I've been a stakeholder as much as I've been a service provider, and it all has to fit into pieces. So you have to spend an incredible amount of time. And the other thing I do is I focus. I'm not a micromanager, even though I'm super hands-on. What I do is every day I wake up and I figure out the biggest things we're trying to accomplish and where the biggest problems are on those things. And I go put my time on those things. And I can't tell you how many times I've presented to boards, hey, we're doing this big thing. I took 2 months to convince them to do it. Now we're going to execute. Here's the biggest risk. And a month later, I'm like, hey, that's not the biggest risk anymore. This is the biggest risk. Hey, that's not the biggest risk anymore. This is the biggest risk. Like, because you just have to keep taking that on over and over again. And if you throw yourself into that, and you are a service provider back into your organization to help, remove the blockers, give a good culture where there's no blame, high expectations, people start to see that there's a real pride factor in it. I can't tell you how many people at Chico's, we put 9 platforms in about 18 months. It was like by far the biggest project I've ever done. We ripped and replaced so much stuff there, and it was wildly successful. And I still have people to this day saying, I just can't even believe it. I did not believe you. I didn't think we could do this. This is the most thrilling ride I've ever been on. And I was like, hey, it was thrilling for me too. Like, it wasn't just you. You guys did it too. Like it's not about me. It's about getting all the pieces together. And it was just amazing. And I think a C-level's job is to get the people around them to do more than they think they're capable of. And it doesn't mean working 12 hours, but whatever hours you're given to the company, that's the time you give, and have a bunch of fun doing it. And not blaming people is not the same thing as not holding people accountable. You want to be the one that's adding value and not slowing the train down at some point. So you find your own problems pretty quickly. But I don't know. It's a symphony a little bit. It's sometimes it's hard to even explain, and it's scary a little bit, because sometimes I've had interventions where people have come to me and said, you said August, and I'm telling you, it's going to be end of year. And we end up hitting, to your earlier point, we end up hitting September. And I'm like, and I get scared. I'm like, am I the only one that just doesn't believe that it's going to be, 5 months late? And, crap, because you get one mistake. I made a really big mistake at FTD. I hung with a partner for too long, and I was the only one, and I was wrong. And that's the biggest one I remember. Of course, everyone makes mistakes, but you got to get that symphony, and even it's not just about the soloist, man. Everything has to sound really beautiful and work really well together. There's another long answer.
It's all good. I was going to make a joke before. You're like, oh, we're doing a podcast. I'm like, I don't think that's going to work out. I mean, podcast, who wants that noise? But the hero culture, I'm curious that you brought that up a couple times now. Give us a walk around, the clubhouse of the hero culture. What do they do differently? How does it smell, feel, look?
A hero culture is, and it's hard enough to do it in your own department. And then it gets harder if you're talking about your company. And then if you start throwing in a systems integrator and literally 9 platforms, I could rattle them off, and so you've got, a dozen companies and all kinds of different departments. And it's hard even just in your own department to do this. But what it really means is that it gets back to, kind of ties back into self-awareness. It's like you can control the things you control. And when we have a problem that comes up, we have a new platform rolling out, tax is not reconciling. There's something wrong, and the business gave us the wrong tables. The connections are not working fast enough, and the APIs are slow. The blah 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 blah. With everybody, you just reward the person that finds the problem, and you double reward them if it's in their own area, and they're heroes to the organization, because you feel good and confident in that vulnerability you have. I mean, I have it. Everybody has it. When it's like, this is going wrong, you're like, holy shit, man, are you sure it's not them?
Right.
Could it be someone else? Like, hey, I'm pretty sure I'm buttoned down. This is somebody else. And if you just stop and look at all the things that you could have done to cause this problem, is there any chance it's in your area? And you reward that, literally reward that. We called it a hero culture. It's 2 companies in a row I've just called it the hero culture. Is then people are not only more willing to come forward, but they're actually more willing to seek, first. And then even if somebody does end up pointing out, I looked at my complete area while I was looking at that, I realized Shelli had uploaded this thing, and we worked with Shelli, and it's all fixed. So ergo, it wasn't my fault. It was Shelli's.
That's right, Shelli. Why did you do that?
but
We've talked about that before.
You don't just applaud, the milestones that are hit. You got to applaud. I remember when we first launched at FTD, and we had and all this, and it was wildly successful. And in the middle of this implementation, in the busiest time of year, the site went down, and we only had like 20% of the traffic going through it. And we were in a war room. There's 25 people. And I said, I flicked the lights. I said, stop. Hey, before we do anything, let's remember, this is the first time in the history of this new platform it ever went down. So everybody clap. Okay, stop. Now you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. It's like when there's a fire in your house, you don't want to grab gasoline and throw on it. 3 seconds is okay to pause to make sure you're doing the right thing. 30 seconds is too much, but 3 seconds is, oh, wait a minute. What do I need to do? Okay, A, B, C, go. And so you have to bring levity to those problems and make those not like a bad thing, because they happen every single freaking day in everybody's life, personal and professional. So those are the places that you want to highlight and be willing to talk about.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
I think the taking a pause, I forget the name of the book, but it's written by, I think it's an F-35 pilot, talking about making decisions, right? And one of the things that they teach these pilots back in the day was like, you tap one of the, I forget exactly whether it's the speedometer or whatever, right? I'm showing my lack of knowledge here, but just
tachometer or whatever, I don't know.
Whatever it is, right? Just to take a bead of like, hey, like think before you just react, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to Iceman, who's like, you're thinking you're dead. And of course, that's a great movie, but, but I thought that joke was going to go better. All right, whatever. They're not all winners, so I'll call myself out. I'll be part of the hero culture. That joke was bad, Pat, and it's my fault.
Well
I
played.
need to show up with better jokes. So,
Should we applaud you now?
yes, exactly. Well, I do think, I'm curious because I do think that creating that culture of self-awareness and willingness to, I think it 100% is a critical thing for any plan or effort to go well, is for everybody to be willing to check their own stuff first, and to like take ownership of it. You must have done more than just said it to people, right? Is there things that you did to like warm them up to it? Because like there's got to be that moment where everybody goes, okay, I can do this, right? I'm not gonna, because it does feel like if you go to a new organization, it would feel like a trap, right? Where it's like, okay, so that's what they say, but let's see what happens when
I don't start there. No, you're right about that. I mean, you had asked, and I actually didn't answer. When I go into a company, there's always 3 types of people. When I brought in, there's people that immediately are like, thank goodness something new is happening. And that's probably, I don't know, 10 or 15%. And they're immediate advocates. And then you got, and they're outward advocates. And then you've got 15% or so that are immediate detractors. And And you've got the majority that you don't know because they're hovering in the middle and they're waiting, or they're not ever going to give it up. And the goal is to get to those middle people and be super consistent for your first whatever months it is, because you need to establish trust before people are going to jump onto that hero culture bandwagon. I don't even think I brought up those words until I was, at a company for over a year. And you do it one by one, and eventually you realize that a whole bunch of those middle people are probably in either the naysayer bucket, or I'm just not to declare. I've seen these guys come and go, and I'm just going to hang out here until the next guy comes in, and I don't like that. It's not a good place for me. And so you start to try to bucket them a little faster, and detractors become advocates, advocates become detractors, and you just keep being consistent. And you make mistakes, and you transparent. I'm a huge communicator, so I usually give people that work for me a lot more information than they're used to getting. In fact, sometimes I skirt on the edge of what I shouldn't even be sharing. And eventually you find out the people that are on board the approach and the direction. And you have to, and the people that owned a lot of the past, you have to spend extra time, because it's hard when you talk to somebody, that put 6 months into a proposal, and you walk in and look at it and go, we're not going to sign that. And we're going to reboot this whole process because I'm not convinced. But you can't just say that, because somebody put a lot of time into it. And it's like, look, and I want you to help lead it, or we're going to include these criteria, or here's why. And so you have to spend a lot of time on the people, because the people that often have been there a long time, they've also got a real heart and soul into the company, and they're super vested. And I remember when Shelli and I were working together, and it was a bit of a turnaround when I went there. And I don't know, maybe 2 months in, they went out on a boat ride for all the people that were celebrating their birthdays. And I went to the head of HR at the time. I said, well, we shouldn't be doing this. Like, we're in a turnaround. What the heck are we renting boats for? And she turned to me and she said, we know, but we're committed for, like, yeah, we got it. And I was like, okay, yeah. I could have just come in and just started yelling that, and then, another 10 people would have been detractors and like, why this guy being a jerk? Because it's not just about the what, it's about the how.
Right. So could you tell us a little bit more about, what that means, the how, not so much the what?
Yeah, I have a couple comments on that. First of all, the what, that I think in a lot of companies, you're either in growth mode and you're trying to handle growth, or you're in some sort of detraction and you're trying to handle a downside event. Either way, there's a lot of change going on. And I think in my experience, almost every company I've been to, it's not a lack for understanding what needs to be done. And there's a lot of people that you could drop me into a company, and probably within 60 days, I don't care what department it was, I can say, here's 5 things you need to do, not 50, but 5. And they may not be the perfect 5 after 60 days, but people will go, yeah, you're pretty much right. And it really comes down to the how you go about doing it, and how you go about executing. And that's, people make comments about management and leadership all the time, and they sometimes they even pan management, and they say, you don't want to be a manager, you want to be a leader. No, you need to be both. And I have a lot of respect. I've had some great managers that are really good at what they do. But when you start crafting the how, especially in a high tense environment, whether you're on a Coast Guard ship, or whether you're, doing a turnaround inside of a company, or a growth story where you have to, revamp all your systems and your data, there's a certain approach, and that people are watching, and you're setting an example, you're setting a culture. And the more time you spend up front on that, by the time you start executing, you've got a wave of people that are already behind you. When I first entered, even back again, when I worked with Shelli, my instinct was to be on that boat and kind of pout, because early on in my career, it was very much about, hey, this is black, it needs to be white. I'm going to get a paintbrush and I'm going to paint it. And a lot of times I just kind of ignored all the external ramifications of the pain that was causing, and the angst that was causing, or the uncertainty that was causing. And I had a boss tell me, it doesn't do you any good to score a touchdown if there's no one with you to celebrate. And so if you the more work you put up front to where it's, what I like to say is you've kind of crossed that hump, and all of a sudden there's more people on board than are wondering whether, and in fact, I've even had people that were telling me I was going too fast finally said, okay, we've got enough now. Can we just go and do something? And you start getting pushed a little. And it's like, all right, now we've hit a point, because I love going fast, but you have to bring people along for that journey to be able to instill that type of culture to go fast. And when it happens, there's no better feeling in the world when you get to that point where you can just start executing. But it's that leadership piece, the how you go about doing it, that spells the difference between success and failure in my experience.
You think, because I think high performers, right? They like to go fast and they know how to push themselves, right? So when did you start to feel and realize it's not so much about the speed, but we got to get there healthy, right? Together, like stronger muscles, not degraded sinew kind of thing. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll fast forward. Once I'm in a company for a period of time, there is no direct report you could ever talk to of mine that was with me from, say, 18 months to 2 years onwards that would call me anything short of a speed freak, because I love speed. I love bringing it into the company. I love being public about it. I love talking about it. But that's after a little bit of time. And because you can't walk in there and start talking about that, right off the bat, because it's not speed to start. The speed is all within me. And it's really disciplining yourself to get into the detail and understand all the unintended consequences that could happen with the actions that you're about ready to take. So it still is fast and you're pushing yourself, but you're pushing yourself in a different way. It's more, I don't even want to say it's on the soft side, because in a way it's even harder. And it's getting to know the individuals. It's starting, you lose a few people, you bring a few others in, you start bringing different vendors in, you create a process of how you talk to vendors and people watch you do it, and how you speak to customers and what matters. And that's why I mentioned before, and you should always be consistent as a leader, but that first 6 months, it's so crazy critical to be really, really, really consistent. Because if I want to talk to how do you make 1 million happy customers? One at a time. So if I want to talk to a customer every single day that spent $100 in a $2 billion company, I can't do that once and just say, hey, pat my back, or go sit behind a customer service agent. I have to be engaged every single day. And eventually you get people to start to see that. And that's like a stupid little example. Or getting into the budget and how much we spend, when you start asking questions about people's areas that they can't answer, and you don't get mad about it. You say, look, I am going to understand every dollar we spend, and therefore you're going to need to understand every dollar. And the faster you get there, the more that the organization can trust you with that money, and then to make decisions around it. And so there's a few, guiding principles, and one of them is certainly money, knowing your org, knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And so you start channeling them to start to look inside their areas more, because in high intense environments, there is an inclination for some people to look at the problems that are outside their areas. So I tend to really retreat with inside my own department for the first, however much time that is, and to get my own house in order and to establish ourselves and the trust and the culture within ourselves, and then pop back out to the org as kind of a, version 2.0, where we can then navigate a little bit more freely.
And Jay, that kind of plays into something you shared with us earlier. You said when you join a company, not everyone who welcomes you is your friend, and not everyone pushing back is your enemy. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, this is a really interesting story that I was thinking about when we first started. I went to one company, Vitacost, and it ended up being bought by Kroger. And when I first got there, everybody's like, hey, you want to go out and have some drinks? You want to go out and have dinner? And I was like, no, I don't. I'm going to go home. I'm going to spend time with my family. And yet I'm a social person with my department. I'm actually an introvert, but with my department, I create bonds. But I remember I won't give his position or name, but I remember one of my direct reports came up to me and said, I know why you're not getting close to us. You're not getting close to us because you have to fire us. Then that's going to be hard for you. And I said, you've got it exactly wrong. By the time that we have formed a relationship, if there's something that happens in this company where I have to make tough decisions around positions, the people around me will respect it. And that's how close I need to be with you before we can start interacting like that, because we have to have that professional trust first before we can establish a social trust with each other. So it's and I meant it. It's like most of the reorgs I've done, and I've done some tough ones and big ones at scale that are public, that are out in the, they're in 10 Qs and 10 Ks. Most of the time there was at least respect behind it, even in a lot of cases of the people that were impacted. In fact, I've been let go twice, and both times I was like, I get it. And because you'd established that relationship where there were reasons behind it and you kind of understood it a little bit. Now, not everyone gets there because that's really hard, but I just think that you have to really establish that professional side of you first. You can be engaging, you can be fun, you could have a lunch in the same room, but you got to be careful not to get too, intertwined with the social aspect of business until you've established that credibility and trust. And then there's always, then again, still lines you can't cross. And again, early in my career, even when you knew me, Shelli, I mean, I remember when I was hired at the company, and I don't know if this is already covered or not, but that the recruiter, my predecessor, Dan Saffron, was leading the replacement of himself. And the recruiter went to Dan and said, "You don't want this guy. He's a bull in a china shop. He goes too fast. He's going to break glass." And Dan said, "You're wrong. That's exactly what we need, because I'm not that. I'm so far away from being that human." And fortunately, I was just enough on my journey of personal growth that I came in with some softer edges, but I learned more and more softer edges, which has enabled me to hold people more accountable and to go even faster, because I do it with care. I mean, and people know that. Nobody ever questions my caring. It's one of the best compliments I ever get, that I care. Where if you come in and just start ripping shit apart, people don't think you care. And in fact, people that do that don't care to the same extent. You have to get to know the people. You have to do the hard work up front.
Great advice.
The term impatient comes to mind. You say move fast, and I think there's people who are very similar, like mine. And I think a lot of our listeners, they think fast, they move fast, they're okay with the friction, and I think it's the impatience that people think. And I hear this from friends and people that I know, where they're like, "I've got to learn how to calm it down." And my advice is always no, right? You got to where you got to because you've got the capacity to be impatient. And that's not a negative thing. But what I hear when you've turned the impatience from external to internal, of like, hey, I've got to be impatient in making clear expectations. I've got to be impatient in creating the clarity, instead of, hey, we need to be impatient in making forward progress. Of I'm going to be impatient in making things clear, understanding what I'm joining, what exists, why it exists, and being impatient in that way, instead of what we see is impatience and destructiveness and thoughtlessness, and just going into make noise and the new head coach going to the Jets, where he's like, Aaron, I don't want Aaron Rodgers in the building when I get there. Yeah. I kind of understand that as a Bears fan, right? I get that part, but there is a certain component of well, why didn't, slow down, right? But that impatience is I think there's a lot of people that get to that point, and you said your own growth journey, and that's how I feel a lot of people get to a certain level, and they think that this great skill and ability that they have is something that needs to be reined in instead of directed and controlled.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's just a different form of speed, and it's satisfying a different area of impatience. And there are times, and super smart, successful people that I look up to, most of the time they probably knew the answer up front, or at least had a pretty good idea of it. But I had a different boss tell me, I've learned they're all my mentors, even though they don't know it. And some of them were bullies and some of them were enablers. And my boss with Shelli was a great enabler. And he used to say, hey, I'm right 90% of the time, but that other 10%, that's a doozy. And because those are the big ones. And so when you also discipline yourself to get into that level of detail, again, especially early on, because you can start gunslinging a little bit more later, and you've got a bunch of people around you some are more, some are going to slow you down, some are going to speed you up. You need that whole ecosystem around you for the check and balance. But you actually come to conclusions that are different than what your hypothesis was. And if you go too fast, you miss a lot of valuable information from a lot of valuable people. Even though you might be right 70% of the time or 80% or 90, by slowing down, not only to get people on board the execution speed level, but you also sometimes, this is why you hear leaders often say, I love being proven wrong. They're not blowing smoke. It's legit. It's like, oh my gosh, I thought this is exactly what we should do first. And now after spending all this time, this is what we should do first. I can't believe my eyes have been opened. And I've told all my directs, again, usually after the first year or year and a half when they're set, when they're the settled direct reports, if you all come to me with an idea and you just want me to sign it, 99% of the time, I'm just going to sign it. You've already done the work I'm going to ask you to do anyway, is do you have all your teammates on board with you? And they've done it a few times. They've had interventions with me and said, look, you're going down this path and you've had individual conversations with all of us and we think you're just wrong. And this is the path. And I remember one when I was picking Zendesk over Salesforce.com on the CRM, the Service Cloud one, because I don't always get along with Service Cloud and Salesforce. Great company, but they're slow and they don't fit the fast thing. And Zendesk was really fast, but they didn't have as good a technology. And I just hung my head right in the meeting. It was like a 30-minute meeting, and 10 minutes in, I said, okay, fine. I'll start negotiating with Service Cloud. You guys are 100% right. And I knew that thing was there because it doesn't handle the order gracefully. That was the actual thing. And I knew it, but I thought, where there's a will, there's a way. We'll make it work. And I have great technicians and great product managers and great business people working for me, and they'll figure it out. But it was a big blocker. And these guys and girls came to me and just basically intervened on me. And I've had that happen more than once. I always say 99% because I don't know what come to me saying, we think you should all give us a 20% raise. Okay, fine. That's not happening. But the power of direct reports, is incredible, because as a leader, you have to be really sure of yourself, but you also have to be humble enough to listen. And there's a line there, because you can't stand up and say, this is our strategy. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. What do you guys think? By the time you're there, you got to be talking confidently. So you got to be humble enough to take in those inputs and confident enough once you get there. But that intervention and harnessing those people that they understand they have the power to sit you down, close the door, sit down with you even one-on-one and say, look, I've got to tell you something. And when they're right, they're right. And that's why leaders love to be proven wrong, because it means they already thought something good, and now they're finding out there's something great that's better than good. And that's why it's not just lip service. When you hear someone say that, it's because they've been through it. And I think some people use that lip service sometime, but the practical, application of it is, you just made us better by doing that. And if anything else, do it faster and get there quicker if you can, to save us a lot of time. Speed is always going to be there for me. That's never going away. I've had so many people do replatforms. I just did a big one at Chico's, and I had like 9 different vendors and all this stuff, and they all have come to me and said, that is the fastest we've ever gone. We thought you were crazy. We never thought we'd hit the date. There is nothing. And it was remarkably successful, but it was the speed one where they exceeded what their own expectations of themselves were. I carry that with me forever. I'm like, that's exactly right. If you can get people to do more than they think they can do, that's gold. And I love it when I have bosses that I'm like, I cannot believe I'm doing this. Joe Vecchiola sent me over to India and said, go build a JV for pre-press. It's never been done. I mean, I gave him the idea. He goes, yeah, go do that. There'd never been an American creative agency for a company like ours built in India. And I went and built it, and it became a JV with 20 people. Now there's 1,000 there. I couldn't believe he was letting me do this. It was like just amazing how much an enabling boss can be once you have established that trust.
Well, that's amazing. Jay, I can't say thank you enough. You did not fail to impress. I've always enjoyed our conversation, the previous calls that we've had before. Tremendous leader and humble, right? As I definitely I think it's
I appreciate that.
a great hallmark of a great leader, right? I think it's easy to have trust in people when they're like you, right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. Looking forward to hearing more about your adventures and hopefully, you find the speed you're looking for at some point. There's maximum velocity somewhere that you're like, I found, permanent joy in your pursuit. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Jay.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me. Thank you both, Patrick and Shelli. And Shelli, it's always great to reminisce. Someday we'll have to have a side call and you'll have to give me your perception of me back then. I just feel like I was so young.
We both were.
But you look the same. I feel like we're just like right back where we were.
Thank you. That's very kind.
But you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we also want to thank our listeners. We appreciate everyone joining us today.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.